Pwede ba mag-civil wedding muna, tapos saka na lang mag-perform ng Islamic wedding or nikah? A few comments under my previous video made me realize na baka hindi naging clear kung ano talaga yung nangyari sa amin. In that video, I showed a clip from our Walimah, followed by a clip of my husband and me signing our marriage documents inside the courthouse. Because I didn't include the complete context, some people thought na nauna yung Islamic wedding namin, followed by a civil wedding. And some may have also assumed na intentionally namin pinili na mag-civil wedding muna tapos saka na lang namin inayos yung nikah later. But that wasn't the actual timeline. So instead of answering the comments one by one, I want to tell you the full story of how our marriage came to be. From our civil wedding in 2023 to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guiding me back to practicing Islam, to my husband accepting Islam, and finally to our nikah and walimah in 2024. Hindi ito step-by-step process na dapat kopyahin. But inshallah, I hope our experience can help other reverts, people who are still learning about or considering Islam, spouses of reverts, or couples who are also trying to correct parts of their lives for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. First things first, hindi chronological yung pagkaka-edit ko sa clips. The actual sequence was, we had our civil wedding before a judge in 2023. My husband took his shahada in May 2024. We performed our nikah in June 2024. And then, after our nikah, we held our walimah. So, hindi siya Islamic wedding muna, followed by a civil wedding. It was actually civil wedding first, then shahada, then nikah, and then walimah. Quick clarification lang because people sometimes use these words interchangeably. Magkaiba ang nikah at walimah. The nikah is the actual marriage contract. The walimah is the wedding feast or celebration connected to the marriage. So, yung first clip na nakita nyo in my previous video was from our walimah, but our marriage as Muslims was established during our nikah, not through the walimah. To understand why we had a civil wedding first, I have to tell you where we were in our lives at that time. I met my husband during a very low point in my life as a Muslim. I still believed in Islam, but I had become very distant from the deen. I was neglecting my obligations and was no longer consistently practicing Islam. I'm not sharing that as an excuse, and I'm definitely not trying to normalize it. It was wrong, and I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive me. My husband, on the other hand, was agnostic at that time, although he had been raised as a Protestant Christian. Pareho kaming hindi practicing, and ayaw naming i-impose yung individual beliefs namin sa isa't isa. I believed in Islam. He did not believe in religion. And because neither of us was taking religion seriously at that point in our lives, we decided to have a civil wedding. So in 2023, we had what Filipinos normally mean when we say civil wedding or court wedding. It was a non-religious marriage ceremony presided over by a judge under the family code. We appeared before the judge, made the required declarations, signed our marriage certificate, and became legally married through the civil process. The judge was acting as a civil solemnizing officer. Our ceremony was not arranged or conducted as a nikah, and under Philippine civil law, we were legally married. But from the Islamic perspective, that ceremony did not make us Islamically married. The most important reason was that I was Muslim while my husband was still non-Muslim at that time. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Mumtahana, verse 10, that believing women are not lawful wives for disbelieving men, nor are those men lawful husbands for them. So, I want to make this completely clear. Our 2023 civil wedding was not the proper Islamic process. We did not begin our marriage according to the Sharia. And our story should never be interpreted as, pwede pala mag-civil wedding muna tapos ayusin na lang yung nikah kapag convenient. No, that is not the lesson of our story. It happened during a period when my husband was not yet Muslim and I was seriously neglecting my own religion. It was a situation that we later sought to correct. Jumping to 2024, Alhamdulillah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guided me back to practicing Islam. So minsan, ginajoke ko, parang 2 beses akong nagbalik Islam. First, when I originally accepted Islam, and second, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guided me back to actually practicing it properly. But just to clarify, the second time was not another conversion, okay? I never stopped believing in Islam during that low period. I had left the practice, not the belief. Kasi may mga nag-a-assume pa noon na nagbalik Christian do ako.
Huh?
I mean, is that even a thing? Balik sa bad habits because I struggled and hindi ko kinaya ng maayos yung test from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at that time. Siguro ganun. Pero balik Christian? No. I never stopped believing in Islam. Once Islam gave me the truth, I could never and will never unlearn it. I'll share the full story about how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guided me back to practicing Islam in a separate video. But when I finally decided to take my religion seriously again, I realized that I could not simply change the way I dress, start praying again, and ignore all the other parts of my life that also needed to be corrected. I had to address the loose ends. And one of the biggest loose ends was the status of our marriage. I explained everything to my husband. I told him that I wanted to practice Islam properly again, and I asked him to respect and support that decision. I also asked him to open his heart to learning about Islam, but I did not ask him to pretend to believe in Islam simply so that we could perform a nikah. I did not want him to say the shahada as a favor to me. Shahada is not a wedding requirement na sasabihin mo lang para ma-check yung box and maging valid yung marriage. It is a declaration of faith. I explained to him that as a Muslim woman, I could not enter into a valid nikah with a non-Muslim man. But whether he would accept Islam had to be his own decision. Alhamdulillah, he agreed to learn. Alhamdulillah, my husband learned about Islam, understood what the shahada meant, accepted what it signifies, and willingly took his shahada at an Islamic center here in Cagayan de Oro in May 2024. But I also want to be precise about the timeline. He did not suddenly become fully practicing overnight. His deeper learning and his actual practice of Islam developed gradually after he had already taken his shahada. One day, after his shahada, I think it was a few months after his shahada, nakita ko na lang siyang mag-isa in front of his computer, searching kung paano magswala. Hindi ko siya inutusan, hindi ko rin alam na ginagawa niya yun. He was learning by himself. From there, Alhamdulillah, the rest was history. Indeed, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guides whom He wills. Today, he is passionate about Islam. He continues to study and learn more about the deen. And siya na ngayon ang nagunguna and nag-i-encourage sa amin as a family to practice Islam. Alhamdulillah. Sometimes, I think back to the man who honestly told me that he could not promise how consistently he will practice. And now, siya na yung nagpapaalala sa amin about our deen. Guidance truly belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then, in June 2024, after his shahada, we performed our nikah through the Islamic Center here in Cagayan de Oro. Our nikah was very simple and intimate. Since I was the only Muslim in my family, I had no eligible Muslim male relative who could act as my wali. Because of that, the Imam and Islamic Center explicitly appointed and authorized my ustada's husband to act as my wali. So he did not automatically become my wali just because he happened to be my ustada's husband. He was formally appointed and authorized by the Islamic authority handling our nikah. Our nikah was presided over by the ustad from the Islamic Center, which is also the established practice in our community. We had freely given our consent. We had the proper ijab and qabul, which means the verbal offer and the acceptance of marriage. We had an agreed mahar, which belongs to the wife, and ours was very modest, by the way. And we had 2 qualified Muslim witnesses. My Arabic ustadas and other members of the Islamic Center were also present. And quick explanation lang because I also did not know these terms before. The ijab is the verbal offer or declaration of marriage. The qabul is the clear acceptance of that offer. So, simplified example lang, the wali offers the bride in marriage with the agreed mahar and the groom clearly says that he accepts. That verbal exchange is the ijab and qabul. They are not the names of legal documents, okay? The written document records the declaration that happened during the nikah. By the way, I also made a separate video discussing the legal side of what happened after my husband accepted Islam and after we performed our nikah. Specifically, what happened to the legal status of our original 2023 civil marriage and how the family code and the code of Muslim personal laws may apply to our particular situation. I'll place the link on that video in the caption para mapanood nyo yung complete discussion. I don't want to squeeze the entire legal topic into this story because ibang video na talaga yun. After the nikah ceremony, we took a few pictures and had pizza together with the people who were there. Very simple and intimate lang talaga yung nikah itself. The pizza was not a requirement of the nikah, obviously, but personally highly recommended. So, just so we're completely clear, that little pizza gathering was not our big wedding celebration, okay? Because our walimah was a completely different story. Even before our civil wedding in 2023, plano na talaga namin na after around 1 year of being married, magse-celebrate kami ng bongga with our friends and family. Parang first wedding anniversary and delayed wedding celebration in one. So, right after our civil wedding, nagsimula na kami mag-save for that big party. At that point, ang plano lang talaga namin was civil wedding muna, then after 1 year, big celebration with everyone we love. But Alhamdulillah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had a much more meaningful purpose for that celebration. By the time the planned celebration came, my husband had already accepted Islam. We had already performed our nikah. And what was originally supposed to be just a big anniversary party became our walimah. So instead of only celebrating 1 year of our civil marriage, we were now celebrating our marriage as Muslims and this completely new chapter of our lives. And another meaningful part was that all of the friends and family who attended our walimah were non-Muslims. We were the first Muslims in our families. So our walimah became an opportunity for us to celebrate with the people we loved while also allowing them to witness and celebrate this new way of life that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had guided us toward. Everything just fell into place. What we planned as a big anniversary party became something much more sincere and meaningful. And good thing, nakapag-save na kami for almost 1 year because the nikah may have been simple but the walimah definitely was not. Hindi ko kayang tawagin simple without disrespecting the budget. Alhamdulillah talaga. So now that you know the full timeline, I want to be clear about what our story means. Our story is not proof that two Muslims should intentionally choose civil wedding muna tapos saka na lang yung nikah kapag convenient. We did not begin our marriage in the correct Islamic way. We began our marriage during a time when I was far from practicing Islam and my husband was not yet Muslim. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guided us, we tried to correct what needed to be corrected. So please do not use our past mistake as permission to intentionally make the same mistake. If both of you are already Muslim, Alhamdulillah, that is a blessing. You already know the direction in which your marriage should begin. Make sure that you enter into a valid nikah and then have that marriage properly registered and documented under Philippine law. Hindi kailangan mamili between an Islamically valid marriage and legal protection. As Muslim couples, we should take care of both. And if you already have a complicated situation, please do not rely entirely on a TikTok video, including mine, to determine the validity or legal status of your marriage. Speak privately with a qualified scholar who can hear your complete circumstances and with the appropriate registrar regarding the legal documentation. And speaking of legal registration, I'll also be making a separate video about Muslim women whose nikahs were never properly registered. I received so many comments and private messages from women who were married through an Islamic process, but when they were later abandoned, neglected, or denied support, nahirapan silang patunayan yung marriage and assert their rights. Important clarification lang, an unregistered nikah is not automatically invalid simply because it was not registered. But without an official record, proving the marriage and pursuing rights connected to it can become much more difficult. That topic deserves its own video because ang daming babae na naiwan to fend for themselves after the legal documentation of their marriage was ignored. And this is the part of our story that I really hope may help someone else. Maybe you are a revert who made major life decisions before fully understanding the deen. Maybe you accepted Islam but struggled and became distant from your obligations. Maybe your spouse is still learning about Islam. Maybe you are considering Islam but you are afraid because you feel like your current life is too complicated. Or maybe you are looking at your life now and realizing that there are things you need to correct. Our experience is not a fatwa for your personal situation, but I hope it reminds you that you do not have to pretend that your mistakes never happened. And you also do not have to remain trapped by them forever. Seek knowledge. Be honest about your circumstances. Talk to people who are qualified to guide you and correct what you genuinely can for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. People do not always arrive at perfect practice overnight. My husband's practice developed gradually after his shahada. My own return to practicing Islam also happened after a period of serious struggle. But gradual growth should lead us closer to obedience, not become an excuse to remain exactly where we are. Our past may explain how we reach a certain situation, but it should not be used to justify intentionally remaining in what we already know is wrong. Our story is not an example of how Muslims should deliberately plan a civil wedding first and perform the nikah later. It is a story of how two people who began their marriage during a spiritually complicated time. It is a story of me becoming distant from Islam, being guided back, and realizing that I needed to correct what I could. It is a story of my husband opening his heart to Islam, taking his shahada, learning gradually, and eventually becoming the person who now leads our family in the deen. It is a story of simple nikah and of an anniversary party that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala transformed into a much more meaningful walimah. Most importantly, it is a story of mistakes, guidance, patience, and correction. And if you are already in a complicated situation, do not panic and do not lose hope. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells those who have transgressed against themselves not to despair of His mercy. So seek proper guidance, correct what you can, and trust that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows every sincere effort you make toward Him. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive our shortcomings, keep our hearts firm upon the deen, guide our spouses and families, and place barakah in all of our marriages. Allahumma ameen. That's all. Assalamu alaikum.